Oh, well, on the one hand, I feel like a tick because I did a video on it far too soon, but on the other hand,
Yes! 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 Yes!
apologies for that. Here's Good Who Bad Who, The Web of Fear. After the broadcast of The Enemy of the World, a special trailer for The Web of Fear was shown, featuring Patrick Troughton in character as the Doctor. Like the 97 lost individual episodes, this trailer is missing from the BBC archives. The audio was preserved, however, and someone on YouTube made a very impressive animation of this novelty in the show's history. It even got a shout out in Doctor Who magazine some years back. Can't remember which issue though. I thought I'd open with this to give some perspective on The Web of Fear, or as the continuity announcer called it, Doctor Who and The Web of Fear. A sequel to The Abominable Snowmen, a serial which currently has one surviving episode, The Web of Fear sees the return of the Yeti and the enigmatic Great Intelligence. The action takes place in the London Underground and introduces the character Alistair Lethbridge-Stewart, at this point in time Colonel, but fondly recalled as Brigadier. So on that basis, it's an iconic story, narratively significant, and planting the seeds to save the show from ending the next year. And for nearly 50 years, all we had of it was a rough copy of episode 1, telesnaps, audio, and a novelisation with a memorable cover. Until the big salvage of October 2013, that is, where 5 out of 6 parts were recovered, and the remaining parts of The Enemy of the World. Apparently Morris and Company had found the whole Web of Fear, but the station sold episode 3 to a private collector before they could, pissing off loads of fans. We'd all like 10 out of 10, but 9 isn't too bad, right? When I found out that they had discovered 9 fragments of 60s Doctor Who, I confess I did overlook The Web of Fear. But now that enough time has passed and I've watched Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear twice, can I reach the conclusion that it deserves its staying power? Was it worth its status as a classic? Previously on Doctor Who, the show became a political thriller devoid of BEMs, and a Mexican Pat Troughton tried to commandeer the TARDIS, but realised the hard way you need to close the doors first. This resulted in Salamander being shot into the time vortex, and depending on your stance on canon, either landed in the 70s and teamed up with the Master, is still floating around perpetually screaming, or, as I'd like to believe, died an incredibly badass death being launched into the oblivion. The serial picks up immediately after this event. The Doctor, Victoria and Jamie are clinging to whatever they can find, trying not to suffer Salamander's fate. It's quite a tense scenario. The TARDIS is normally a safe haven for the Doctor and his companions, and to see it become a life-or-death obstacle course is a terrifying prospect. Credit to the lighting team for phasing in and out of exposure, one extreme to another. Jamie, under the Doctor's instructions, manages to close the doors, and then we jump into the meat of the story. The Yeti are back, the Great Intelligence plagues London with its web, and the normally bustling underground is eerily silent minus the roar of the creatures and a hail of gunfire. And it's Nicholas Courtney's debut as the Brig, but as noted, he's a colonel at this point in time. I appreciate the quiet moments in the TARDIS soon after, because like the scenes on the beach in episode 1 of The Enemy of the World, this is probably the only time the TARDIS team can relax before they're webbed in space. Returning from The Abominable Snowmen is Professor Travers, played by Jack Watling, father of Deborah Watling. He's got a beard Santi would be proud of, and he pulls the most marvellous of facial expressions, which I've preserved as screenshots for you all to enjoy. We're introduced to his daughter Anne, a strong female character that eloquently flips off the lads in the army, and amusingly talks down to her father, when he blubbers about the Yeti he rather foolishly brought back from Tibet, and, more foolishly, decided to tinker with the control sphere, a ball that rolls along with a high-pitched beeping. Yeah, all the lives lost in the 6th part are entirely Travers' fault, aren't they? We also have a few army soldiers. Colonel Lethbridge-Stewart, played by the great Nick Courtney, a Piers Morgan type that sounds like Mr. Deltoid from A Clockwork Orange, Chorley, the gruff Staff Sergeant Arnold, played by Jack Woolgar, and the only Welshman in the story. And this fella. I'll get back to him, but Oh dear, this is a can of worms. Bit of trivia: a Yeti in the story is played by John Levine. He will go on to play Sergeant Benton in The Invasion and throughout John Pertwee's tenure. Also, the underground sets were so convincing that allegedly the BBC got an angry letter from the real underground telling them they'd filmed without permission. Whilst Web of Fear worked well as a reconstruction, it's a whole other thing to actually see in action the fantastic directing from Douglas Canfield. Yeah, there's the odd shot where the illusion is spoiled, zippers on the Yeti costume, but to see the army fight the creatures with dramatic zooms and the iconic Slaven music famously used in the Cybermen stories, to see that properly without stills and the intelligence breaking through the wall, you know, that's a whole other thing. That's nice to be able to see it. Not like it's not a revelation like The Enemy of the World was, because that was such a visual story that it couldn't possibly have worked as a reconstruction. That's why I really did not like watching it. That's why I was so hesitant to watch it. I just could not sit through the reconstructions. But you know, seeing moving pictures instead of stills, that's always good. You'll notice Douglas Canfield uses film a lot, using it for the underground set. He's got a great flair, great style. Canfield will do a few more stories, including The Fantastic Seeds of Doom and The Invasion. And he tutored Graham Harper, the only director from classic Doctor Who to work on the revival. What an influential, awesome creative talent he is. I think another success as well is the stock music. Bela Bartok is an exquisite composer, and his eerie melodies complement scenes such as the Yeti reactivation transmogrifying from cuddly to, okay, cuddly but more ferocious, and also the Doctor describing the intelligence. That's a pretty haunting moment, one of my favourite bits. Alistair Lethbridge Stewart, and by extension Nicholas Courtney's portrayal of him, interesting to say the least. I know fans want episode 3 back as its first appearance, but the Colonel and the Doctor never meet on screen. Troughton, apart from a cliffhanger reprise, doesn't appear in part 2. He was on holiday, and when he comes back in episode 3, Lethbridge Stewart is with him, and he explains to Victoria. It's kind of interesting. It's like the Doctor and Susan's first journey from leaving Gallifrey, or what he says to Ian and Barbara as they depart in the chase. We'll never know, and it's a great mystery. It just makes it all the more interesting. I like that the Colonel believes the Doctor to some degree. Nice change. It's difficult to imagine anyone else as this character, knowing how significant he'll become, and it's a very strong first impression. We also have to thank Derek Sherwin, an underrated player in the classic series, who suggested the character and the exiled Worth, and Hazeman and Lincoln, of course, though I do have a few faults with their style of writing. To give you an idea, The Web of Fear begins with Travers and his daughter in a museum. The owner is a mean-spirited, greedy and paranoid man with an Eastern European accent. His name... No, I'm not making this up. His name is Julius Silverstein. The museum owner, the first character to die, is a greedy Jewish businessman. What do you say to that? Driver Evans, played by Derrick Polly, is another issue, using boyo in most sentences. They give him a pretty hard time too. The Doctor even insults his nationality. The show will continue bashing Wales in stories such as The Green Death and Boomtown. As a fairly young Irishman, I just don't get this. I don't really understand it. But sure, if you do, then, well, you do. There's a thread going through the later half of this story about the identity of the Intelligence's human vessel. It uses Travers to speak to the Doctor with a husky voice and wide-eyed dead face. Kind of sounds like Robin Williams' scary voice in Mrs. Doubtfire, to be honest. But in the end it's revealed to be Staff Sergeant Arnold, Jack Wolgar's gravelly husky voice and northern tones fool you, but when the charade drops, he takes on an expressive, regal voice, distinctive and should be viewed as a strong guest role, different enough to Wolfe Morris's distant calm but scratching inflections, and all the better for it. The Great Intelligence and its Yeti were supposed to return one more time, which is why the Doctor's plan to drain the intelligence fails in the Web of Fear. The story would have been part of the next season. I think it was called The Laird of Maccrimmon. Jamie would have left at the end of it. I can't recall if Trowan would bow out as well. The point is, that didn't happen. There were script problems all throughout season 6, and Haseman and Lincoln had a big falling out with the BBC over the Dominators. So they wouldn't be in the mood to write. The Great Intelligence did return about 44 years later in Series 7 with Matt Smith. In the Christmas special, the opening episode of the second half of the series, and the finale, The Name of the Doctor. However, the Intelligence would return without the A because the estate of Haseman and Lincoln are very fussy about copyright, don't want to part with them. Bit like Kevin McClory. Before the end, here are some pointless notes on the Web of Fear by me. The picture quality of episode 1 on the basic DVD is a great improvement over the one on the Lost in Time box set. You can see them in the screenshots I've taken. There aren't as many line flubs as you'd expect. I know I'm guilty of them, especially when I started making these, and even now. I know that. The end credits show the web pulsating until the final part. I like this. It sets it apart from the other serials in season 5. The idea of a tabloid journalist finding out about the TARDIS seems like its own story. Here it's a plot point. Also, we never see Chorley again after this, so who knows what happened to him. Fraser Hines burns his hand by leaning on a bulb on the console in the opening episode, but like a pro keeps going. It's an unintentionally great character moment for the out-of-time Highlander, as it is an example of the live quality of 1960s television. Surprisingly, there are some subtle makeup and continuity beats. The cut the Doctor sustains from the enemy of the world heals as the story goes on, as well as Arnold's injured body, which is especially creepy when he's possessed by the Intelligence. And we leave on a scene of the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria legging it in one of the tunnels before they switch the power back on and they could get fried. Imagine that. That'd be pretty grim, wouldn't it? Also, at the very, very end of the credits, it rather sensationally tells us, "Next week, Fury from the Deep." In conclusion, The Web of Fear is a solid story and everyone knows it now. With a setting ripe for a spooky story and iconic imagery, you also have a great supporting cast. Of course, from a 21st century standpoint, there's a spoonful of insensitivity. If you can get past those, though, I hope you can see that The Web of Fear is one of the strongest Patrick Troughton adventures, now mostly intact, and one of the best base under siege stories. And now that one wish of mine has been granted, I'm wondering, will this one follow? And will there be animation involved? Time will tell, and it's told us now that The Web of Fear has always been great Doctor Who. I'll mind the gap and give it 9 out of 10, and I will continue to watch it in the years to come.